Sir, the possibility of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
Hello, this is No, and I believe that if you take cranberries and stew them like applesauce, they taste much more like prunes than rhubarb does. Welcome to the After Effects Kickstart podcast.
In today's episode, Joey and I talk about the period from 2004 to 2010. This is definitely the time when motion design came of age and became a real industry. Today we're talking about 4 amazing pieces. The Country Music Television, or CMT, idents, designed and directed by Adam Galt for Eyeball Studios. The Coca-Cola Happiness Factory, directed by Todd Mueller and Kylie Matalik for PSYOP. The Girl Effect by Matt Smithson for Curious Pictures. And finally, the Waiting for Superman infographic, animated by J.R. Canest and designed by Joe Mullen for Buck. So each of these pieces was a major success in their day, and they were all talked about a lot after they were made. Now, this was definitely because they were awesome pieces that were super well designed and amazingly animated, but also it was helped by 2 major technical advances that were going on at this time. Which is one, that fast broadband internet became a lot less expensive around this period, and the rise of social media platforms, which really took off in this period. And without a doubt, each of the pieces here benefited from these new avenues of exposure. In this period of time, we really see a continuation of the trend that we witnessed last week, where people who will eventually become major players in the industry are stepping up and finding their first successes. Adam Galt, Matt Smithson, and J.R. Canest, aka Jorge Estrada, are all making really big waves today still, and they got their first big breaks in this time period. As always, I really think you'll appreciate this episode a lot more if you first watch the 4 pieces, so follow the links that we've left for you and check them out before listening to this. We're going to go into a lot of detail here, and I think it'll just be a lot better for you if you've watched the pieces first. I think this is a really wonderful episode with some amazing work, so let's just jump right in and get to it. Today we're going to talk about 2004 to 2010, and the thing about that period of time, I think, is that After Effects is now king of the world. I think now everybody knows that you can make money off this and you can do great work in After Effects, and also that motion graphics is this cool thing that everybody wants to be a part of. I think 10 years before this, if you told people that you worked in motion design, nobody had any idea what you were talking about. But now in this period of time, 2004 to 2010, I feel like the world catches up and the world now knows what we're doing. And part of this is, I think, because in this period of time too, we see, broadband internet becomes basically the way everybody gets on the internet. And so instead of dialing up, now everybody has faster internet so they can actually watch videos. So that's one thing. Another thing is that social media takes over the world in this period of time. Facebook kind of starts up and becomes a big thing around 2006. And then suddenly we have all these videos that are being made for social media and being played on the internet. So that's kind of like the sort of cultural place where we're at right now. And then I think what happens in this period of time in terms of motion graphics is that we have the rise of some major studios start to happen. And places like Buck and PSYOP and Eyeball that really were small places that were maybe not even off the ground 5 years before this suddenly become major players. And then other studios like Curious Pictures, who had been an animation studio, and I think they did the California Raisins commercials and that kind of stuff. And then suddenly they're bringing in motion people and starting to make a mark that way too. So that's about where we are culturally in terms of, After Effects and the world. So the other thing is, just in terms of After Effects advances, is that in 2003, they do bring in scripting and text layers. So I think that's one of the last kind of really big pieces in place, I think, except for shape layers, which comes in a few years. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up the text layers because the way you used to have to do text was you'd make a solid layer and you had to put the text effect on it. And it was a huge, it wasn't that hard to do, but the problem was you had to kind of make the text as big as it was going to be. And if you didn't know, if you wanted it to be really big and then shrink down, you had to make these huge comps. So it made doing kinetic type pieces and things like that really kind of a pain in the ass. And it's really fascinating because until we started, kind of doing this history of MoGraph series, no, I had never really looked into the history of After Effects and how it relates to the work that was coming out at that time. And it's really fascinating how connected it is.
Yeah. And also, I think in my mind, once these advances become part of your workflow, how surprised I am that like, whoa, we didn't have that. Like you kind of conveniently forget about how difficult things were. I mean, yeah, text layers. Yeah, I used to make all my type in Illustrator just for that very reason, just because I could scale it up basically. And I think, in the CMT idents, which we're going to start looking at next, which comes from Eyeball Studios in 2004, that you could really see where we're at in terms of vector graphics. Like there are still these vector graphics that are hanging out in that piece. Even though that piece is like all about texture, you could still see like vector graphics, and I feel like that was kind of where we were at in terms of type too. That it was still these really kind of stiff things that you had to bring in from other programs, like mostly Illustrator, I guess.
Sure. Well, the CMT, so when these came out, it sort of kickstarted an obsession with Eyeball for me. And I think this created a lot of trends. So some of the things I want to point out to the students with these CMT bumpers, and by the way, these are just a piece of this enormous graphics package that was produced by Eyeball and some other vendors. Like, when this came out, there was so much work that sometimes other studios would get the After Effects files from Eyeball and they would actually like execute different versions or variations. I actually got to do that a couple times and pick through their After Effects files. And one of the things that it taught me looking at these After Effects files was not to be afraid of a ton of layers in your After Effects comp. So when I'd only been using After Effects professionally for probably 3 or 4 years at this point, and I was still kind of afraid of complexity. And to pull off something like this, you can't be. You have to be okay with a comp that has 150 layers in it and 35 pre-comps, and each of those pre-comps has 4 or 5 or 6 layers in it. And so, like, I would say to the students listening, just know that as you get more comfortable with After Effects, you also need to push the amount of layers that you're using. And the style that's kind of hot right now, kind of the more simple, flatter look, doesn't need as many layers, but this CMT style, it's very cyclical. It's going to come back. Everyone's going to be doing this again in 5 years, and you're going to have lots of layers. There was also a big trend right around this time of using Luma mats. So I know in this class we talk about Luma mats, and you can use footage as Luma mats. So in this case, in the CMT piece, they were clearly using ink blots, where you take a piece of paper, you get it wet, and then you drop ink on it, and it kind of spreads out, and you shoot that, and you crunch the levels and create this cool mat. I don't know if there was any ink tank stuff on this. That was really big for a while, where you drop ink into a thing of water, and it blossoms and looks really cool. They were probably doing some paint stroke stuff, some of these, the way things wipe on and off, they look very organic, and it used to be harder to do in After Effects. So what you'd do is you'd shoot like either frame by frame, or you'd get some elaborate light table set up and you'd shoot like a black, a paintbrush with black paint, kind of painting black paint on. You'd invert that, you'd use it as a Luma mat. So there's just so many tricks that came out of, I don't know if it was specifically this project, but it was like at the same time, all these people started doing this.
Yes, those are all good points. And I think just to follow up on what you said there, I think this piece is already quite influential and forward-looking in a certain way. Like the use of textures in here is that's a very big thing right now. And even more than that, I think for TV idents, if you look at the way that this moves, it's mostly horizontal and vertical transitions. And then you look at somebody's work like Gretel, who's kind of been killing it for TV idents right now. And they're still employing a lot of these same methods. Even the Nerdo La F rebrand or whatever, that kind of thing. It's very much horizontal and then vertical moves and kind of simplified moves that pull on graphics. And that's what we see here. And this, like I said, they went to Austin, Texas and shot a ton of elements to create these textures. And that's part of the genius of the design of this is that they tried to think, okay, what does country music look like? You know, translating the sound of it into the look. And I think what they came up with these sort of weather-beaten signs and old authentic pieces of wood, and they kind of went down to Texas and filmed it there. And so it just felt very authentic and very non-clean and vectory, which was just a huge thing back then. Like, everything looked like that, and this didn't.
Yeah, and again, I think this is one of those reactions to After Effects kind of just out of the box. When you start messing around with it, it's very easy to create things that look like they were created on a computer, and it's much harder to make it look like it was created using old techniques. And that's obviously what they tried to do here. They tried to make this look handmade, and they succeeded. And looking through their project files, I can tell you that the only way that happens is with lots of layers, lots of keyframes, lots of, there's a lot of moves. You mentioned, things move vertically, they move horizontally, but they don't move perfectly. There's little hitches to the movement. And After Effects doesn't do that. Like, you have to get in there. And so for the students listening, like, when we talk about the Waiting for Superman titles in a little bit, we're going to talk about like smooth, clean, perfect animation. This is the opposite of that. And both of them are valid choices, just depending on the aesthetic you're going for.
Totally. This is going for kind of a jerky, stop-motion-y, kind of handheld feeling, I think, very much a non-digital look. They didn't want it to feel digital. They wanted it to feel like country music, like old school. So I think it's a lot of hold keyframes, and I know what you're talking about. Something will kind of slide in, and then they'll just put like one little move on it that's like maybe a hold keyframe, and it's like 2 frames after it settles, and it just moves like 1 pixel to the left or something, and it gives it this feeling of like nothing quite ever settles, and like that handheld camera look that, starting in the 80s, I think became really popular.
And I would suggest one good trick is to, you can download this piece from the link that we sent you, or you can just go on Vimeo and watch it. And this is a cool trick on Vimeo. If you hold Shift and use the arrow keys, you can go frame by frame. Go frame by frame through this, and you'll see a lot of details that when you play it, you completely miss, but it just kind of adds to the way it feels. And there's just a lot of tricks they use, just messing up one frame here and another frame there, and it just keeps it from feeling too perfect. And so that's something that I stole directly from this piece and used throughout my career.
Oh, yeah. Scrapbook Elvis, anyone?
Right. Exactly. There you go. Little animation bootcamp humor. And also say, too, there was no graph editor yet in After Effects. I think they may have had there used to be, it's kind of a precursor to the graph editor, where you could twirl down an arrow next to the position property and get this little miniature graph editor that, but it was only the speed graph. There was no value graph. And the speed graph is kind of unique to After Effects. Other animation programs don't have something like this. And so it was very difficult to get smooth, clean animation. And still at this time, good animators were not using After Effects. They were still either doing it by hand or doing 3D animation. So I think that's also one of the reasons why this jerky aesthetic was kind of so popular then, was because that's what people knew how to do and were able to do with the tool.
Right, it's totally true. And our students for this class, we haven't gone into the graph editor yet, but we certainly will. We'll talk about different kinds of easing and ways to interpolate keyframe types starting soon. But definitely, if you want more of that, you should take Animation Bootcamp. In motion design, animation is half the equation, right? You've got design, and the design on this is really good. And arguably the harder part of pulling something like this off. But the animation, even though it's quirky and grungy and imperfect, there's still a lot of thought and animation principle going into it. And you're right, that is what Animation Bootcamp's about. But as far as the students in this class are concerned, I think just knowing that 2 keyframes, the start and the end, that's not where you finish, right? You start with the start, then you go to the end, and then you get in the middle part, and that's where you give it personality. Mm-hmm. Between the keyframes. And we should say that this is designed by a guy named Adam Galt, primarily, and he's... So in this period of time, I think what we're going to see with almost every one of these pieces is that a studio has taken a tremendously talented individual and hired them to either design or animate or both of this piece. In this case, there's this guy named Adam Galt. And if you want to see some of his current work, he's got a company called Block and Tackle that you should definitely check out. They're one of the real top lights of the motion design industry, I think. And they're still kind of small, I think, but getting bigger all the time. And they're definitely known for design. And I think, like we always say in this podcast and in general in this class, good design is the key here to everything, because even in this piece, you could see that this kind of jerky, fairly limited animation still made all of us sit up and take notice, because it was really well done, but it was really, really perfectly designed. And again, the design comes from the concept. The design is communicating the idea of country western, and that's what it's meant to do, and that's why it's so good.
Yeah, and I want to say one more thing about this too, and this is kind of a downer, so I apologize in advance, but. So I mentioned I used to be obsessed with Eyeball, and they had, there was kind of a high point for them creatively, I think, where they were doing stuff like this. They had this really kooky music video they made with a puppet. There was like a bunch of really cool stuff they were doing. Their website was nuts. It was this Flash thing, and it was, anyway. And then they started to kind of tail off in terms of like the super creative, I've never seen that before stuff. And if you go to their website now, it's unrecognizable from what it was back in the early days of Eyeball. And this is a trend that, I think it's important that students are aware of, that most studios tend to have a cycle to them where they start up, no one's heard of them, very quickly achieve their creative peak, right? Everyone who started that company did it to create cool stuff, and all of a sudden they've got the resources to do so, and they make amazing stuff. And then the realities of the industry kind of set in, and they have to pivot a little bit and start to go after bigger money jobs, and maybe they want to become more of a quote agency, and where they're doing copywriting and coming up with ideas and working directly with clients. And slowly over the years, you see the work start to change. I've seen Digital Kitchen go through this. We talked about them in the last episode. And Eyeball certainly went through this. It's very difficult for studios to maintain this type of coolness for more than a few years. So, that's just something to be aware of in the industry. Like, who's hot right now may not be hot in 5 years. And I would point to studios like Giant Ant and Buck, which somehow have managed to sustain being super cool and super successful at the same time, because it's super difficult.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, definitely in New York, where I live and work. I mean, I worked at Eyeball probably a couple times, but later than this, probably around 2010. And there was already, I like those guys over there, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about them, but there was definitely already, the writing was on the wall that things were less exciting there, and that they were paying people a lot less. And yeah, I went for this class to look at their website, and I clicked off of it right away. I thought it almost looked like somebody else had taken over their site. It looked like some sort of generic, I don't know, like not even a design company. It looked like an explainer video company had taken over their site or something. It was a little strange.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you. So here's my theory about that: is that when you start a motion design studio and there's 5 or 6 or 8 of you, and you're all super passionate and you're buddies and all and you're young and all you care about is doing cool work, then that's what you'll do. As you become successful and you're like, oh, well, now we need to hire another producer. Now we need some more staff. Now we have 10 people. Now we need like an HR person. Now we need a comptroller. Now we need a CFO. Now, all of a sudden you're a 20, 30 person company, and it costs $200,000 a month just to keep the doors open, especially in New York. I can't even fathom what it costs there. And so you have to, just by necessity, take in more money, and doing cool stuff like this isn't the best way to do that. It's not the most efficient way. And so what the best studios, what Buck does, for example, and they're one of the few that have managed to remain super cool and super relevant and still like grow and keep growing. The Mill would be another example, is they are very strategic about doing very high paying work that does not go on their website, and then work that they completely, take a bath on and lose tons of money on, but creatively super fulfilling and gets them noticed. And there's one of those we're going to talk about in the next episode.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Buck is going to come up twice in this because they're so darn good. And so,
for sure. Yeah.
Though I kind of wonder now if companies like Giant Ant are sort of taking Buck down a little bit, and that in 10 years, Buck might not be the coolest thing in the world. But I don't know. I guess we'll see when we get there.
We'll find out.
But I think a similar thing happened to PSYOP as well, too, which is the next company that we're going to talk about, and their piece, the Coca-Cola Happiness Factory. And PSYOP was known for kind of being really cutting edge, I feel like, before this. And then when they made this piece, even though this is very cutting edge in terms of, CG and graphics and the lighting, and we'll talk about this more, it sort of was so mainstream that it sort of began the end of them being cool or something. So I think that's what you're talking about before is still really relevant to this next piece. Well, let's just say, so Coca-Cola Happiness Factory came out in 2006 and was directed by Todd Mueller and Kylie Madalik, who are two of the founders of PSYOP. And this is not done necessarily all in After Effects. This is obviously a 3D piece. It's mostly done in Maya, but it was finished in After Effects and Photoshop, and apparently also in Flame, which I thought was kind of funny given what we talked about, how Flame was kind of like on this long, slow descent. And this has got to be one of the last pieces that it got used for that was really successful. But, and also just what this is a 90-second commercial. This is obviously a prestige commercial, both for PSYOP and for Coca-Cola. I have no idea what the budget was on this, but it's obviously just kind of huge, right? Yeah. And just to start this off, I just want to say that 6 years after the Catch Me If You Can title sequence came out, your grandmother also called you up and wanted to talk to you about seeing this piece because this was so big. This was huge. This played in movie theaters, and it actually spawned multiple sequels for a commercial, which is pretty, rare. And also, I think they made a movie out of this. I don't know how long it was, but there's something that I was looking. It was called Happiness Factory, the movie. I didn't watch it.
That's all. Just trying to cash in on the. Exactly. Well, you brought up a couple of points I want to talk about. So, the first thing is, I was just kind of struck while you were talking about PSYOP and how they were cutting edge, and now they're a little bit more. They're still pretty freaking cool, but you go to their website, you see their work. It's far more high end, polished, corporate, I guess. It reminds me a little bit of the way people talk about bands. Their first album is like when they're creatively just the most on fire, and then and they're in their 20s. It's like Incubus is like a band I love. I would see that they're a good example where their first albums were raw and everyone fell in love with them. And now, 20 years later, I mean, they're in their late 40s and they're not making the same music, and they want to relax a little bit and like maybe tour a little less, and so you can understand that. And I think that you have to keep that in mind too, probably because I'm assuming that when PSYOP was founded, the people who founded PSYOP, they had different life goals at that point than they do now, kind of approaching middle age or deep into it. The other thing that this spot did specifically, and PSYOP did, I think, a lot, is they created this confusion. What the hell is motion design? Because when you look at this, this piece, it is a piece of motion graphics, and it kind of felt like it lived in that world, but it's also just a straight up character animation CG piece. And those two industries are still, in my opinion, fairly separate. And those two, there are career paths leading to one or the other, but there's also some overlap, right? And I won't call it a controversy, but this confusion has certainly not been settled by any stretch. People still aren't quite sure when does something cross over from, okay, this is just a straight up Pixar CG animated piece, and when does it cross over into motion design,
Yeah, and actually, you dropped the P word, Pixar, which I was going to bring up a little bit here because, in 2006, arguably, this was kind of the peak Pixar time. The Incredibles had just come out, and they hadn't yet done like some of their biggest stuff like WALL-E and Ratatouille, but they were in that era. It was all within a couple of years. And I feel like this really was influenced by that, but takes it in a slightly different direction, which I think is really cool. But I think they were definitely responding to Pixar. And I think companies in general were, we were all waiting to see, okay, when are we going to be able to take Pixar-style storytelling and amazing CG and put it into the commercial world and have it work just as well there? And that might be what this piece is, but apparently some of the character design here, like they didn't put eyes on the characters because they didn't want it to have too much of a Pixar feel. And, one of the things I really like about this is as you look at it, is they added in a couple of slightly strange, gross elements that I don't think you'd see in a Pixar movie, which I think were kind of daring for Coca-Cola. Like, my favorite thing is the little fuzzballs that are
with
kissing each other, but they kind of like, there's this moment where they're really like French kissing each other, and it goes like a little over the line of being gross. Yeah. Same with the like guy who lands and puts the cap on, the bottle's got like a missing tooth, and there's just like a couple of like little weird, imperfect moments, like, I don't know, that I think keeps this piece, the humor in this piece, really great. Yeah.
And PsyOp, the PsyOp's look is really, to me, it's kind of based on like really brilliant conceptual artwork and character design, and then you combine that with just top of the line 3D chops. Like they get the best character animators, modelers, lighters, compositors. That Coke Factory or the Happiness Factory, I mean, that is an insanely technical execution. It takes a lot of people. And by the way, I don't know the budget. I would be shocked if it was under $1 million.
Yeah. I mean, it took 4 months to make at least. I think that's just the production of it, not the conceptual stage. Apparently they met and talked about just like story details for 2 weeks straight on this and stuff like that. Yeah.
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, and you mentioned storytelling. I mean, that's what makes this spot so good. The design and the execution of it, brilliant, but it's such a cool idea. And there's all these unexpected moments, and just the arc of it and the way the music, I mean, so that's kind of, to me, what PsyOp is best at. I mean, they're the best at a lot of things, but like, to me, that's what sets a PsyOp piece apart. And that's what kind of, there was a time, I don't know if I could still do it, but there was a time where I could see a spot and I could tell PsyOp did it. You could just kind of tell. There was this FedEx commercial that they did a few years ago where the forest turns into like this magical place and the trees start singing, and it's so weird but awesome. And the second I saw it, I knew PsyOp did it, and I went and checked, and of course they had. I want to point out, because this piece doesn't have a lot of obvious After Effects in it, it was composited in After Effects, meaning, and for the students that don't know what that means, the 3D stuff came out of another program, Maya. I know they use Maya. They also use Softimage over there for a long time. But when you render things out of a 3D program, like Cinema 4D, which you're probably more familiar with, it's very rare that those images go straight out of Cinema 4D and onto TV. They always, I'd say 100% of the time, go through After Effects or through Nuke, or maybe sometimes still through Flame. At the very least to color correct them, but in a lot of cases to do a lot more than that, to add film grain, to add things like depth of field. A lot of times that's added afterwards. There's like some cool technical ways to do that. To add things like motion blur, to color correct specific pieces, to, there's just a lot of things, to add particles, to add, to mix in like real footage of smoke and fire. Sometimes it's quicker to use that than try to create 3D versions of that. So the PsyOp has crazy After Effects skills at this point. Another piece from around that time is called Ink for a client, T. Rowe Price. And that one, there's still a lot of 3D in it, but there's a lot of way more obvious After Effects stuff, including some ink tank stuff. So we'll link to that in the show notes, but check that one out too, because they had some really amazing After Effects artists on staff at that time.
Yeah, you mentioned lighting, and I'm not a technical 3D person at all, but the lighting in this in particular is gorgeous. I mean, that really makes it stand out. Apparently, they were inspired by Renaissance paintings and by Caravaggio, for any of the art people out there that are listening to this. And you can really see that, those clouds with the like god lighting kind of coming from behind them and the golden rays and all that stuff. I mean, it looks so naturalistic and perfect, and then offset that with this kind of kooky, whimsical fantasy world that we're inhabiting. And even the bottle looks like photorealistic, and then the characters are these very stylized, like no faces, kind of weird. I think the mixture of those two things is actually pretty subtle, the sort of realistic and the fantasy in this, and it really, really works somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, and they continued this trend. Like they did the campaign for UPS where the world was made out of cardboard. And again, it's just like this brilliant idea. executed perfectly in a super highly technical way. I mean, there's a campaign in that spot, and we'll link to that too in the show notes, where there's like an ocean made out of cardboard, and just trying to figure out what that looks like, and then how the hell technically do you make that happen in a 3D software? I mean, they were masters of both domains, and I mean, they really still are. They've just their aesthetic has shifted to be a little bit more, I'd say safe would probably be a good word.
They're doing they do like cell stuff now and almost like flat motion graphic-y stuff. I feel like everybody's biting everybody. For example, you said that you felt like you could always tell a PSYOP piece, and I agree with you. But when I saw the Sherman-Williams paint chip pieces first, I thought that was PSYOP because that's kind of the PSYOP world. But that's actually done by Buck, I think, right? So
that was Buck, yeah.
Buck's amazing. I'm not saying Buck ripped anybody off, but like I feel like everybody's dipping their toes into other people's stuff. And the one final thing I do want to say about this piece, which I think we have to mention, and we probably did a little bit, but this has a super clear story, and that's one reason why it is so successful. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they're all clearly defined beats, and they're simple. The beginning, the guy puts the quarter in. That's it. The end, he takes a drink of it and looks back at the machine. That's it. And then the middle is the storytelling is just perfect. It could be shorter, it could be longer, but that little capsule is what makes it gives it a brilliant framework for the animation that happens in there. If we didn't have that, the piece would be muddy and unclear. So
yeah, it's easy to forget. It's easy to forget that. If there's no story, no one cares how pretty it is.
It's so true. All right. And and the other thing that happened in 2006 in terms of After Effects is they made it one big panel, and the sort of screen takeover. And I don't know if you want to talk about that change at all, but Adobe's done that now for Photoshop and Illustrator and After Effects, and that was a big deal at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how much that influenced any aesthetic choices people were making, but at the time before this, After Effects was a collection of floating panels, and I'm trying to remember like if they were all floating or if just some of them were, but like the effects panel would just kind of float around, the timeline would float around, and you can still do that, but it just doesn't really make sense. And other apps that were compositing apps like Combustion was kind of popular at this time, Commotion, and Flame, they were all unified interfaces. And I think Adobe was, I think this is what my theory, I really have no idea, but I think they were probably trying to make After Effects feel more like those apps because they were more expensive, they were more high end. Well, I say high end in quotes, like in air quotes. That was the perception that like advertising agencies had. And so, yeah. And I think it was around this time too, and this was actually kind of controversial, Noel, was that the interface went from a light theme to a dark theme, and then they added the option to go back and forth because it was like, there was no, wait a minute, it doesn't look like After Effects anymore.
Right. And now everybody goes with the dark theme, I feel like. Nobody goes back to that. Like when you see old After Effects windows and it's got that light theme, it just looks so
jarring. Yeah.
Most people like dial all the way down to the darkest part.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's talk about the opposite of the Happiness Factory.
You're talking about the girl effect now?
Correct. Yeah, this is the complete opposite. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So 2008. So a couple years later, but still done like literally right around the corner from Eyeball at this place, Curious Pictures, that we were talking about earlier. This guy named Matt Smithson, who also goes by the name of Man vs. Magnet, which I always mix up with Man vs. Machine, which is a different, also awesome motion company. I think it was run by a different guy named Matt also. Anyway, but one's British, one's American. In any case, Matt Smithson is this real artistically minded fella. I think he was kind of a painter and an illustrator, and I think he went to art school, and he just had this kind of really artsy design edge to him. And I guess, so this piece comes at a time when After Effects is being employed here for the first time, I feel like, to kind of save the world, which kind of became like a huge trend for these, like, they're things that weren't really like a PSA or public service announcement. What would have been like a public service announcement now in the world of kind of social media is just its own little like video which can kind of spread. And a company like Nike, I think, hired Curious and Matt Smithson to make this to promote social good around the world, which was kind of a new thing at the time. this was a kind of a super flat. So yeah, exactly the opposite of Happiness Factory, like you said, like super flat, a little bit of texture, but like basically like one guy made this like it feels like in his bedroom kind of a piece. So in a way, it's kind of like going back to like older school After Effects stuff, but made at a big studio for a big client. So that's kind of the difference.
Yeah, and by the end of this class, every single student would be able to replicate this and do something like that. And that's kind of the interesting thing about this piece is that the execution is so simple. However, to me, watching this, it's way more powerful of a viewing experience than to watch The Happiness Factory. Happiness Factory, whoa, that's cool. You watch this, you're like a little choked up at the end, and you get in the feels, you know?
Yeah.
And so again, like we harp on this a lot, but you know, the execution is probably the least important thing in most cases, in most motion graphics projects. And in this case, the design is almost an afterthought. You know, it's just what's the least amount of design necessary to convey this message. And there's a couple of moments in here. You know, this is an After Effects class, and you're learning to use After Effects to move things, create animation, stuff like that. There's a couple of moments in here where animation is telling you something. It's not just there to move things on and off screen in an interesting way. It's actually communicating. There's a shot where the word girl is on screen, and all of a sudden baby animates on, and then husband, and then poverty and HIV, and then those things are removed. And it's the movement telling you a story. So I'd like everyone listening to start noticing stuff like that and think about animation not just as how do I make it look cool, but what do I want to say and how do I say that?
Yeah, another great moment like that is when the word flies, the tiny little word flies is like buzzing around the word girl. Yeah, he does that a lot here because all of the elements in this piece are type, except for the circle, which is kind of a motif, which sort of looks like a moon a little bit, the way that they've textured it. But yeah, definitely. And most of the animation are cuts as well in this, and it's kind of cut. And we have to say that not a lot of pieces at the time were being made, and even still, where there's a strong message, but where you have to read everything off screen and there's no voiceover. A lot of times for commercials, what people do is they reinforce the type on screen with a voiceover to sell the message. And I feel like part of this is that it's not kind of yelling at you like that. It's sort of just telling you the story. I think that's partially why you get choked up watching it is your brain has to do a lot of the work to visualize what this story is telling you about because it's keeping it without any real representation except for the type. So you fill in a lot. I would take like a slightly different tack from what Joey just said though about the design of this. I think this is really, really beautifully designed because they stripped away everything except for what's absolutely necessary. So I think this communicates really well. So from a design standpoint, it's not like bells and whistles beautiful, but it's exactly what it needs to be, and so it's perfect. So, and it also just want to say that it's a limited color palette. I think it's 3 colors, which more and more I think that kind of limited color palette stuff started coming into play in the world of design, as we'll see in the next piece too.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point, and I think you kind of revealed like a bad habit I have, which is I still, even though I should know better, I associate complex design with good design, which it is not, right? Design at its root is solving a problem. The problem in this case is how do I clearly communicate this idea, which is kind of a complex idea. You know, like if you tried to write out what this video is saying, you'd have to really think about it. So if the design was as elaborate as say the CMT piece, the CMT graphics package, it would have cost way more. And Nike probably didn't want to spend a ton of money on this. But also, you might miss some of the nuance of the message because you're focused on how cool that thing looks, right? So you're right. The design is perfect. It's simple, I guess is what I was getting at.
Yeah, good.
Which is good, which is not bad. Yeah.
And I should say that this won a Webby Award, it won a One Show Award. Matt Smithson was given a Young Gun Award after this. And then 2 years after it came out, the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum included this piece in the triennial exhibition at the Smithsonian entitled Why Design Now? So, I think this is definitely, this idea of like using design to solve the world and using animation to solve the world's problems. This is a huge trend that basically goes on to this day. And I really think that because of social media is why you'd start to see things like this. I mean, in the past, this would have been a PSA on Channel 13, and it would have been on the air twice, and that would have been about it. But thanks to the modern world, this kind of piece just became super viral. And I don't know about you, Joey, but I got asked, so I did a lot of work in advertising for social causes, like, what was that called? Like problem solving ads. I forget, for social, anyway, there's a specific term for that, but I'm forgetting it now. Anyway, I got asked to do this like a million times. So many times people referenced this video and said specifically, can you make something just like this? And I think even Matt Smithson did too, because they made 2 other versions of this. This is almost like the Happiness Factory in some sense, even though it's the opposite, is that there was a much more fully developed, fully animated piece made out of this with like characters and stuff. And then even Matt Smithson went back and did like another one for Nike a few years ago that was even more advanced. So yeah, this definitely opened a cookie jar of some sort, I feel like.
Yeah, there's one of my favorite people in this industry. Her name is Erica Gorochow, and she recently gave a talk at a conference, and one of her slides was just this quote, or I guess just like the sentence. It said, "Design is a superpower." And everyone taking this class, if you look at this piece and you watch it and you feel something, once you learn just a little bit about design and storytelling and how to use the tools to create something like this, you now have the same superpower. And it's kind of, I think once the advertising industry and brands caught on that, whoa, this is like really powerful and cheap. You don't need to go out with a 35 millimeter camera and a film crew and do casting. You can just have a good script, a good idea, and some simple design and animation and touch people with that. It really is a superpower. And I think that's why all of a sudden everybody wanted to do this. And there's a lot of really bad examples of it because you can, this piece, it looks very simple. It would have been very easy to be too heavy-handed with this. And it also would have been very easy to just make it feel flat. Like, I don't really care that much about what you're telling me. And it's the combination of the design, the animation, the pacing, the copywriting, and the music. Let's not forget that. The music is perfect for this, and it builds and everything. So
and widely imitated all on its own. That sort of tinkly piano thing.
Exactly, yeah. But it's harder than it looks, but technically you now have the tools to do this if you're listening to this podcast. And so I that's something I've been more fascinated with as I get older, is like using these powers for good, because this kind of thing, like, you can make in your bedroom over a weekend and put it on Facebook now, and a million people could watch it by the time you show up for work Monday, and you've raised awareness about something important.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's a huge deal. And I think I just want to talk one other technical thing about this. I would guess that the way that this is done is that the type is probably designed in Illustrator and then brought into Photoshop as individual layers and then given that like light texture. I think nowadays, if you were to do this, you'd probably apply the textures as moving textures in After Effects. But the way that this looks to me is like they were just so happy that they got something that wasn't flat on screen, that had like a little bit of texture. So they were like, yes, perfect, awesome. Because at the time that was a big workaround to have to do that, to like design the type in one software and then bring it into another software, add like light texturing, and then bring it into a third piece of software just to start moving it around. So it was kind of a pain in the butt.
Yeah, people did it.
Yeah, and looking at the advances in After Effects after this point too, like I feel like most things are now pretty much in place. Like at this point, unless they come out with some other huge tool, I mean, we've got pretty much everything. I mean, now it's like they're just making little technical advances behind the scenes to make the previews happen faster, or they're adding in like the brainstorm button and then getting rid of that, but nothing that like really should be impacting anybody too much after this. Which kind of brings us to our final piece here for the day, which is actually like a really good companion piece, I think, to Girl Effect, because it's another piece that's got sort of a flat design with a little bit of texture in it. And it's another piece that is trying to improve the world. And I'm talking about the Waiting for Superman. I guess this was not in the documentary Waiting for Superman, which was a big documentary, which was a follow-up to An Inconvenient Truth, which I think was the first like Academy Award-winning documentary. I don't know. It was a huge documentary, The Inconvenient Truth, won a bunch of Oscars, and the director of that was Davis Guggenheim, and this was his follow-up documentary to it. And he was kind of trying to take on the education system. Now, I think this piece was done at Buck, even though the titles for that film were done at U&Co. And there was even an animated sequence in that was done for U&Co. And I think, from what I've been able to tell, this wasn't actually in the film, but this was kind of a promo for the film that they brought, that Participant Media, who was the producer of this, brought to Buck for like an advertising kind of a thing.
Right.
So that's the background for this, I believe. And what we'll see here is that this is the first piece that brought national attention to good friend of School of Motion, Jorge, J.R. Canist, Jorge Canedo, Rolando Estrada. I forget exactly.
He's got a lot of names, yep.
But he's the guy that would go on to become like a very famous animator and starter of Wine After Coffee and Blendfest and a whole bunch of things, and definitely an industry leader for us. So in part, this is a piece that launched him, which is, just sort of important in and of itself because he's an important figure for our industry. But this piece in and of itself, I would say this made infographics sexy. How do you feel about that, Joey?
That's a really good way to put it. I think there's a precursor to this type of video that we'll put in the show notes. It's called What Barry Says. And I saw this piece, another After Effects artist friend of mine showed it to me probably back in 2004, 2005. And it was kind of, someone took audio, it was a rant about the Iraq War, and made, kind of flat vectory motion graphics to that. And for some reason, it didn't catch on outside the industry. But all of the sudden, a piece like this comes out, and, you were talking about the girl effect spawned this whole industry of doing kind of CSA type videos and trying to influence people using motion design. This took that and poured gasoline all over it and created this raging inferno where now literally everybody needed this and they wanted it to look just like this. And you're right. So this was kind of Jorge's big break, I guess. He was working at Buck and he animated this, I think, all by himself. He didn't do the design. I think Joe Mullen did the design. I
have to ask, how old was he when he did this? Because this is 10 years old and he's still mid-20s. Am I wrong about that? So
this, so this piece is, as of this recording, 7 years old. I want to say Jorge was probably like 19 or 20 when he did this. He's everyone, if you're not familiar with him, go check out. He's just a brilliant dude. And if you end up taking animation boot camp, you'll hear a lot from him because he's one of the people we interview. And okay, so let's kind of unpack this piece here. So this kind of has everything, okay? It's got a really smart concept. It's got a good message. It's got really good, simple design. And, this piece, when I saw this piece, what I thought, my first reaction was, oh, I could do that, right? Because up until this point, everything that I had been working on had far more complex design to it. And, you caught me on the last, when we were talking about Girl Effect, I said the design is, I forget how I put it, but, essentially I was saying like the design, there's nothing to it. And me, implying that like, oh, it was easy to design because there's no bells and whistles. Well, that's how I thought back then. And I saw something like this and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's no bells and whistles to it. This design, it's deceptively simple looking. It's actually really well done. And there is a lot of nuance to it that, now understanding more about design, I catch. But at the time I thought, oh, it's shapes and type and some very simple little kind of almost clip art looking illustrations. I could totally do that. And then I realized, well, why do I like it so much? And the reason that at the time I liked it so much was because of the animation. Jorge has a style, and now it's kind of everyone has that style because he just kind of made it cool. But it's like really a lot of contrast in the movement. Everything eases in a really poppy kind of way. If you notice, things don't ever just move and stop. They go a little too far and then they come back. And that's called an overshoot. That's something we talk about in Animation Boot Camp. Sometimes they'll kind of move the wrong way and then move the right way. They'll anticipate. There's a lot of overlapping motion. He was not the first person to do this, but he's the first one I really noticed taking After Effects and turning it into a high-end animation tool and using it the way animators were using pen and paper and frankly Flash back at the time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And using simple geometrics. So yeah, the design of this is not super complex, like you were saying. I mean, it's complex, but it's not overly complicated. And I think that allows you to really focus in on the individual pieces of animation that he's doing here. So it's a really good combination. And it's actually funny because Jorge is one of the rare people in our industry that is primarily known as being an animator, but who's also a rock star. And that doesn't happen that much. Most of the rock stars are designers and illustrators, right? It's very rare that it's like, oh, I watched this piece and it was done at this place, and oh, the animator, let me look up who animated it, because usually a big team of people or whatever, but usually like there's a lot of hardworking animators that'll work on stuff, but they're not superstars. It's like a guy like Patrick Clare, who has like a team of animators working for him, but he's kind of seen as the visionary. I feel like Jorge's the visionary in this piece, and that's who we talked about, not so much Joe Mullen, who designed it all, but because he was such an excellent animator. Yeah, and I think you're right. It's about the eases here. We just hadn't seen this before. It's like he really tackled the graph editor in a different way and did it with these simple geometrics. A lot of this design is based on circles, and then he uses circles to wipe and create transitions in this really brilliant way. He also uses rotation in a very sophisticated and restrained way here a lot. I feel like when people do rotation transitions, they're really big. They're like the whole screen is like rotating, and you're having like an epileptic seizure or something. Here he's using these like little rotations that are fast, and it's just something about the pacing and the speed of this that's just still amazing.
Yeah, and I believe that it was right before this piece was produced that After Effects finally got a full-blown graph editor. So this was done in 2010. We were on version CS4, and this was pre-Creative Cloud. It was still the Creative Suite, and I think you still had to buy the whole thing for $1,000 or whatever. You couldn't just pay the membership fee every month, but it had a graph editor. And I think the reason Jorge is so well known in our industry, and you're right. I mean, he's actually a pretty good designer too. He kind of sells himself short there. He's really good at that too, but he's not known for that. He's known for his animation. And I think the reason After Effects artists all over the world, worship him is because he showed us all that like the tool we use every day, just like you can master it at a level we didn't realize. This is a little inside baseball with School of Motion, but like when I saw this thing, I was running a studio, and I had always tried to solve problems in After Effects with more. Okay, like we need this design isn't working. I need more pieces to move so that it feels good. I need more whatever. I need more movement, or I need more effects. And a lot of After Effects artists, most of the After Effects artists I worked with at that time had the same mindset. And all of a sudden, this piece comes out, and we hired an animator named Kyle Predke, who he's also featured in Animation Bootcamp. And what he has in common with Jorge is you can give him 2 layers, and he'll move them in a way that's awesome. And that's what Jorge proved. You don't need a whole bunch of bells and whistles. You just need to know how to animate. And it totally changed my outlook. And then when I started School of Motion, I focused heavily on that principle because I found that so many of us, it's interesting, the pieces we're talking about today, Noel, CMT is kind of that old guard where you couldn't make this in After Effects when that piece was made. To do something really kind of groundbreaking and cool, you had to rely on design, or you had to like do a lot more manual keyframing and make it look organic and grungy. And now this piece comes along, and we finally have the tools to take a triangle and make it move in a way that's like, oh, it just feels good, I use the word feel a lot when I talk about animation, and this piece has that. And if you look at the stuff Jorge's done more recently, it's gotten even more sophisticated and just precise and just good. He's a good animator.
He's damn good, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And he's still working with geometrics, and I feel like he's still he's still the same guy. He's just sort of practicing and getting better and better and better. And he'll add something in like lighting, and he'll make that Memorial Sloan Kettering piece. And it's just like the same beautiful movements, but now there's this one extra layer of sophistication. Yeah, in a way, he's not necessarily following a lot of trends in the industry. He's just sort of doing his own thing. And I think that makes him special. You mentioned contrast here, and I just wanted to bring that back up again. The contrast in movement is really, really special here. There's slow things, and then there's very fast things. And he'll do this kind of trick where he'll transform one object into another, and I feel like when you see what he's doing is he's always making the transformation happen as it's moving at its fastest point, so as to kind of hide that, and he's just got a lot of little sophisticated things. I feel like I hadn't actually watched this piece in a few years, and like any of these really cutting edge motion pieces, they all date just a little bit, because like I think something like this, we all now start to use the graph editor a lot more because we want to make animation like this. So now I can watch this and see like some moments where maybe it's not quite as sophisticated as something he'd be doing now and that kind of thing. But still, I just feel like infographics were kind of nowhere before this. And after this, explainer videos and infographics, everybody had to do it. Everybody had to come up with these little visual wordless metaphors, like the two hands shaking or whatever. Like I feel like the Google search engine got exhausted with people looking for things like, okay, what's a good visual metaphor for, togetherness? And then it would offer up like the hands shaking. We'd all go on iStock Photo and get like the same icon.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And, and this is something that we talk about in Design Bootcamp a lot, is the idea of visual language and using design to say something. And I mean, this was not the first piece to do that. I mean, designers have been doing that for 100 years. But this was the first time that I think it was just the design and the animation and the way this is put together made all of that so accessible. And it was so obvious. After seeing this, it's like, oh, I get it. There's like, 32 triangles, and each one represents a person. And one of those triangles pops out, and there's a little test tube next to it. Oh, that means they're a scientist. Like, it was just, and nothing that was done in here. And frankly, everyone taking this class probably can look at this by the end of the class and maybe not be able to recreate it perfectly, but understand how it was done. And there's a lot of pieces prior to this, the pieces that we were all talking about, where that's not the case, where it really took years of practice and knowing the tool inside and out, and probably more than one animator, because a lot of things Coke Factory took, I'm sure, a team of 20, 30 people to pull off, No one person can do that. Versus this, a good designer, a good animator, and a week can pull this off.
Yeah, and have maybe the same impact as that other piece, that Coca-Cola piece. It kind of leveled the playing field a lot. I mean, I think we saw that throughout the internet age and throughout this, desktop computing age, is that as the tools became more available for everybody, there were still amazing people in big teams doing stuff, but also the one guy in their garage could kind of still get it done. And now I think in 2004 to 2010, studios recognized that and started hiring those people really exclusively to work for them and make the names of the studios.
Yeah, and I think too, we have to just call out that this piece and other pieces like it probably also signaled, and I don't know if these were a cause or an effect of this, but so the slow decline of the budget for stuff like this. Because to pull off something like Coca-Cola Happiness Factory in 2006, I'm sure took $1 million. Today, with more sophisticated tools, faster computers, there's like global arbitrage. You can hire an animation company in Bangladesh and stuff like that. It probably is still really expensive to do something like that. However, to do something like this Waiting for Superman infographic, you could hire any decent animator and if they can design a little bit, and you're not going to get this. This is buck, right? This looks really, really good. But you can get something close for maybe like $5,000. And ad agencies and brands started to realize this. And so they, it took a while. But these days, everybody understands that if you want this, it's not very expensive anymore.
Right. And explainer videos are now all sell. They're all like character-driven sell stories. The more sophisticated ones are actually 3 years ago, the more sophisticated ones. Now, I don't know really who's making explainer videos anymore, except for explainy.com and people that just
That's
do it
an
for a living.
interesting. You just brought up an interesting point. So, the explainer video, and basically when we say explainer video, I'm sure everyone is aware of that term, and you probably have a preconceived notion of what it means. I think there's a range, right? Explainer videos, like this is an explainer video. But when you say explainer video, you're thinking of like, meet Sally. Sally's phone loses its battery all the time. And so here's battery.
Like the final project for our class.
Exactly, whatever it is, right? But it's really a visual essay. You're telling a story and you're showing visuals with the story. That's kind of the way I look at it. So that became super popular for a while. Buck's done plenty of them, and they still sort of do them, but they don't do the stereotypical explainer video anymore. However, there are companies. A really good one to look up is ThinkMojo. ThinkMojo has doubled down on the explainer video, but they do very high-end ones. They do them for Slack and Dropbox and companies like that. There are companies you've never heard of, I guess more low to mid-level studios doing explainer videos that you'd look at and you'd cringe and it's just so cheap looking. But there is actually a high-end explainer video niche now. And these studios are not ending up on Motionographer yet. They're not household names on, like in the MoGraph world. But they're out there and they're doing really well, and they're doing it, in a way that it's still something you can be proud of. ThinkMojo, we'll put them in the show notes. You should check them out.
Yeah, cool. I haven't actually heard of them, but I feel like the explainer video has definitely gone from being cool from when JR did this to like nothing that anybody particularly wants to do now. But and also the budgets, like you said, they've gone down to nothing practically for this kind of work. So who wants to do that?
Yeah, but I will say this, like, so from a creative artistic standpoint, no one signs up to do explainer videos. Like, that's not what they want to do. However, you also have to juggle what you want to do with how you're going to pay your bills. And explainer videos, in my opinion, they're not going anywhere. Like, they'll be here forever. Like, Pandora's box is wide open. Like, right?
It's so true.
Yeah, it's open. We can't close it. And if you can, the skills you need to do a good explainer video, you need some design skills, you need some animation skills, and you need storytelling skills. You need to understand how to tell a visual story, visual metaphor, stuff like that. If you can get decent at all of those, you will have a job for the rest of your life. You will always be able to find work because there is so much of that work right now. It is not going anywhere. And that may not be what you want to do, but just know that it's a way you can pay your bills and then do the stuff you want to do once you have some savings.
Yep, and it's a great way to practice visual storytelling, like you're saying, which is the key to everything that we do. So
and these can be really well done. Look at some of the stuff Giant Ant has done. I mean, so Jorge, who we're talking about, went to a studio called Giant Ant, and they did some explainer videos there that are unbelievably cool. And they are explainer videos, and they explain how a product works. There's one they did, I think it's for Solia, and it's like a dental laser commercial. And it's amazing. It's beautiful. The metaphor in it is so cool. The animation's just brilliant. The design's good. They can be artfully done. And if you kind of just watch them from like I don't know, like you're just looking at them from a design and animation standpoint, ignoring the fact that this is intended to sell a $500,000 laser for dentists. Just don't think about that, there's still a lot of art to it, I think.
Sure, or how a bean becomes a fart. Didn't they do that there? That's like a great little
Sure,
silly
they did an explainer about how farts, for men's health, right? So again, that's intended to be a viral video for men's health and sell more magazine subscriptions. But aside from that little detail, it's a brilliant piece of work,
It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah. And finally, I just want to say, last thing about Waiting for Superman is also that it was scored by a guy named John Black from Cypher Audio, who's a major player in our industry too. And this must have been an early piece that he had done, but it's worth listening again and just thinking about that because John Black's awesome, and we should link to him also for this podcast. And you should do some Cypher Audio stuff.
We haven't talked a lot about the audio in any of these pieces. None of these pieces work without the audio. Frankly, no piece that we've talked about in this whole series works without good audio, and it's easy to forget that. So I think I'm glad you reiterated that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, check out his work. Yeah, I think we've talked about music and stuff, but when it comes to like really scoring music and sound effects for a piece, I mean, it obviously, like Joey was saying, that makes animation work so much better, always. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up for this week. This has been great, a little bit longer, I think, than the other 2 times, but there's a lot to talk about here now that we're getting into the real modern world. So thanks all for listening, and thank you, Joey, for joining us.
Anytime.
Wow, this was a really fun episode, and I love these pieces. I think they're all awesome, and they've held up really well. I have to say that each one of these pieces had a huge impact on me personally and my career, except for the Happiness Factory because I've never been a 3D guy. But certainly with the CMT idents, the Girl Effect, and Waiting for Superman, these really inspired me because I felt like I could sort of make them. I mean, yes, they're made by hugely talented people who are amazing designers and animators, but they're still individuals and not some huge team of like the best people with an army of technical knowledge and people behind them, right? So, I'm really into music. And so for me, I always come back to this metaphor, which these pieces for me were like the Ramones or the Stooges. Those bands taught future punk rockers that even if they only knew 4 chords, weren't good singers, and maybe weren't even that good looking, that they could still start a band, get a record contract, and become world famous superstars, right? So for me, these pieces were a little like that. They made me realize that I was good enough to be a designer and an animator. And, I was going through my imposter syndrome phase at this period of time and working in New York at some of these actual studios that we're talking about. So these pieces sort of really helped me move beyond that. So hopefully you'll all get a little bit something out of this and are kind of starting to see the way the industry developed. I think it's really interesting to chart the creative trends alongside of the technological advances and see, what led to what and where things started. Thanks again for listening to this, and please remember to stew your cranberries with applesauce. Otherwise, they'll taste much more like prunes than rhubarb ever could. Ta!